Okay, recording now and ready for you to start whenever you want, Ali. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal. So, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. This is the Pearson Test of English General and it's all about how paper 2 is scored, and this is part 1 of 2 presentations. So before we start, just a little bit of online housekeeping. Just so that you know, in case you miss anything, the session will be recorded and shared afterwards. If you have any questions regarding the content as I'm going through, please put them into the Q&A and I'll aim to cover those at the end of the session, time permitting, because there's a lot to get through. And I know we said 40 minutes. We did this morning, I think it was about 45, so I do apologize if I run over. If you have any questions related to exam logistics and dates and things like that, please just get in touch with your local test centre. Okay, so that's all the important housekeeping things. Here's the official welcome. And thanks for joining this Pearson training series that we've prepared for PTE General Test Centre teachers. These webinars are part of a complete series where we'll be covering topics such as how the tests are scored, how the papers are scored, how to prepare your students for reading, writing, the different skills, revision and strategies, and also how to take care of your students and yourself. And that last session will close the programme and will happen in early May. My name is Aline Boundy and I'm your presenter today. I'm based in the UK and I've worked for Pearson for many years. I'm currently one of the senior team of examiners for the Pearson Test of English General Speaking Test. Okay, so that's me. And just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, because this is part 1 of 2 presentations on the speaking test, okay? So we're going to cover the tasks. There are 4 tasks, as you know, from sections 10 to 13. We're going to cover the qualitative aspects, 5 of them. We're going to look at the marking criteria for all of these in detail and how that's applied to the test, so how we actually score them. And in today's webinar, we'll focus on sections 10 and 12. And in part 2, we'll look at 11 and 13. Okay, so that's an overview so you have a sense of what we're doing. Okay, so timing for the tests. Now, compared to the written tests, the speaking tests seem very, very short, don't they? The first 2 levels, A1 and L1, are only 5 minutes. Level 2 and 3, 7 minutes. And levels 4 and 5, 8 minutes. And the speaking test at all levels is worth 25%. So what I need to get across to you is that that's the actual time that we time as examiners. That doesn't include the introduction at the beginning that the interlocutor will give about, you know, centre number, test number, candidate name and number, interlocutor name and number. All of that, we start timing after all that, and I'll show you exactly where we start timing further into the presentation today. So we have the 4 tasks. Section 10, personal information. Section 11, discussion, which doesn't happen at the 2 lower levels. Section 12, which is describe a picture or pictures. And section 13, which is the role play. So those are the 4 tasks. And then we have the 5 qualitative aspects, which are also assessed. So there's a score for each one of the 4 tasks, and there's a score for each one of fluency, interaction, range, accuracy, and phonological control. Okay, so we'll be looking at all of the 4 tasks and all of the 5 aspects over the 2 presentations. All right, moving on. So I want to invite you to look at the test in maybe a slightly different way. Now this could possibly be how you always think of it, but I'm just going to invite you to look at it from a different perspective. If you had to divide these 4 tasks into 2 groups, How would you do them? How would you group them, and why? I don't need you to answer me. You don't need to put the answer in the chat. It's just for your own process. How would you group them and why? And I'm going to suggest that in the next slide. So we've got 4 tasks. They kind of fall into 2 different groups. And I've color coded them to show you what I think those are. So if you see, I've color coded 10 and 12, which I earlier told you we were going to cover today. And these 2 tasks test speaking primarily alone and at length. Okay, the personal information and the section 12 describe the picture. And the other 2 tasks test aspects of discussion and interaction with another speaker. Those are 11 and 13, the discussion and role play. So they'll be covered and discussed in part 2. Okay. So today we're going to focus on 10 and 12, as well as fluency and phonological control. And tomorrow, in part 2, we'll look at sections 11 and 13, as well as interaction, range, and accuracy, just so you have a sense of where I'm going and what I'm going to cover each day. Okay. Before we go any further, I want to look at the marking scale, which is a scale of 1 to 5. I know you're aware of this, but just let's go quickly through it to make sure that you know what these are. So the marking scale for each of the tasks and for each of those aspects, each is given a score of 1 to 5. And altogether, this eventually turns into a mark out of 25 for the 25%. So a mark of 1 means the performance is below the level that the test taker is being tested at. A mark of 2 means the performance is just at the level. They're kind of a borderline test taker. A mark of 3 means that the performance is at the level. A mark of 4 means the performance is almost at the next level. And a mark of 5 means the performance is above the level. So if we're marking, say, level 3, we're constantly looking at level 2 and level 4 as well, looking at those criteria to make sure that we are marking it accurately. So a candidate who's been entered at the correct level and performs at level, for example, matches the marking criteria for all the traits, will receive a score of 3 for each individual trait because they're at level. The maximum scores possible for the 6 different levels that we have are, for A1 and L1, there's a maximum score of 40 points. That's because we have only 3 tasks at those levels. There's no discussion, no section 11. So 3 tasks plus 5 aspects gives 8 item traits multiplied by 5, and that gives 40, a score out of 40, a raw score out of 40. At level 2 and level 4, there are 4 sections, 4 tasks. This gives a total of 9 item traits. At 5 points, that gives a total of 45. And at level 5, again, 4 sections, 4 tasks, 9 item traits, but only 3 score points, because at level 5, the maximum anyone can score is 3 per item trait, as there's no level above 5, so we can't give a score of 4 or 5 at level 5. Okay, so that's the mathematics of it, and I've got a few examples on the next slide just to show you how this works. I'm sure you're probably doing this already for your own information, but the raw score that we arrive at, so the score out of, say, 45 or 27, is divided by the maximum possible total and then multiplied by 25. So an at-level test taker at level 3 who scores 3 across the board gets a raw score of 27. That's divided by 45, multiplied by 25, and they end up with a score of 15 out of 25. just at level test taker at level 5 who has scored 2s across the board. 9 traits, if you remember, multiplied by a mark of 2 for each one gives 18. That's divided by 27, multiplied by 25. It gives us 16.6, and that's rounded up to 17 out of 25. And a below level test taker at level 1 who only manages 1s across the board gets a score of 8, because if you remember, there's only 3 tasks and 5 traits. So 8 divided by 40 multiplied by 25 gives a score of 5 out of 25. So that's just quickly to explain the marking scale of 1 to 5. Okay, so moving on to the meat, if you like, of the presentation today, and we're going to look at the focus of the marking criteria in the tasks. I'm going to clarify for you the difference between the task that the test taker is being asked to perform and what the examiner is actually listening for. So in section 10, you may know it as personal information, or you may refer to it as sustained monologue. I think both are we know what we're talking about when we're talking about both of those. But if you think about it, personal information is a body of knowledge, and the sustained monologue is the task that the test taker is required to perform for this section. It's also the focus of the marking criteria for section 10, and I'm going to go into that in some detail in a few minutes. But before I do that, I just want to make a point about timing. We'll talk more about this in detail on the next slide, but timing is crucially important in section 10 because the mark can be capped if either the section is short or the long term within that section is short. More about that in a minute. And I also, before we go any further, I want to just quickly address malpractice. There's a fine line between being well prepared for the test and reciting something which is pre-learned. The subject of the sustained monologue is not known to the test taker before they get into the room, and so the test taker, your students, have to be prepared for a number of different possible questions. They're not allowed to take any notes into the test, and I just want to mention that we as examiners, we can tell when a test taker is reading something that's pre-prepared or that's been learned off by heart, let's say, ahead of time. We can tell if the test taker has had sight of the paper ahead of the test. And if we suspect malpractice, then we are bound to report it. We don't make a judgment on that, but we are bound to report it. So I just wanted to mention that because it does happen occasionally, and it needs to be addressed. Okay, so moving back to our section 12, which is describe a visual stimulus, describe a picture. It's in some of the documents it says visual stimulus because sometimes it's a picture and sometimes it's a photograph. And the focus for the marking criteria is thematic development. So the difference between those we'll go into in more detail when I get to section 12 a little further on. But I wanted to point out that there's a difference between describing a picture perhaps at the lower levels when the students, the test takers at level A1 and 1 are only expected to describe what they see in front of them, and at the higher levels where they have 2 pictures and they are expected to draw comparisons and that sort of thing and develop the theme. But I'll give you some more details about that as we go through. So moving quickly into section 10 in detail, the sustained monologue. Now we're going to look at the table in a minute, but first of all, I'd like to just give you the definition of sustained monologue. And these definitions, as well as all of the marking criteria that we use, all come from the Common European Framework, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So a sustained monologue focuses on the ability of a test taker to produce a continued oral text that informs the interlocutor about one specific topic. Okay, so the clue's in the name, really. You know, we say sustained monologue. So sustained means it goes on for a period of time, and monologue, there's one person speaking. And this is the section where timing is crucial. So if we look in the table I have here, excuse me, on the right-hand column, the overall length of the section, of section 10, for levels 4 and 5 is 2 minutes. And for the other 4 levels, it's 1.5 minutes. Now I've got all the levels on here just to give you the information, but I have highlighted in blue level 3, and I'll use that as my example. Just to speak about the overall length, we as examiners, we do time this very carefully, and I'll show you shortly where we begin timing so that you know how to start. We only have a 5-second tolerance, so the minimum length of time that we need to be able to account for the overall length of section 10 is 1 minute 55 for levels 4 and 5, and 1 minute 25 for all the other levels. Okay, similarly, within that overall time, if we look at the middle column here where it says minimum long turn, the minimum long turn for level 3 is 50 to 60 seconds. So that's the monologue that we want to hear from a level 3 test taker. We want to hear them speak for at least 50 seconds without being interrupted. Okay, and so the test taker has to achieve that 50-second time, or they can go longer, they can go right up to 1 minute 30 if they can. And then the interlocutor will come in and ask a follow-up question to continue the conversation up to the minute 30. Okay. If that long turn is not achieved within the 1.5 minutes, then again the mark is capped by 1. So yeah, the test taker has to be able to, has to feel confident that they can speak for that length of time in the sustained monologue. And similarly, you know, you as a teacher, when you're practicing for the test, you need to, you know, make sure that they can keep going for the length of time without being interrupted. They shouldn't be relying on the interlocutor to, you know, ask them questions to keep going. Otherwise, it turns into a question and answer session, which is not what it's intended to be. Now, as far as the timing goes, the instruction, the left-hand column here, what the interlocutor in the test actually says is, I'd like you to speak on your own for about 1 minute or 1.5 minutes at the 2 higher levels. Okay, so there's a difference between what the interlocutor says and the actual length of the full section. So the interlocutor has not to interrupt until that long turn is achieved. You can encourage, of course, if you're acting as the interlocutor, you can encourage by nodding, you know, smiling, making noises, non-verbal, things like as you would in a normal conversation when you're listening to someone, you go, that sort of thing is fine. But if you ask a question, or if the interlocutor asks a question, the timing starts again. And there's a chance that they may not finish their long turn within the 1.5 minutes. I said we had a 5-second tolerance over here. If the test taker, sorry, goes over that, we don't penalize with any marks if they go longer, but we don't mark beyond that, beyond, you know, 1:35 or 2 minutes and 5. Okay, we don't actually count that. We'll listen to it, obviously, because we're going on to the next section, but we don't actually include it in the mark. So the last thing on this slide is, remember, this section is not a Q&A. It's not a question and answer, and I'll explain that a little more when we look at the example of the interlocutor card shortly. So these are the marking criteria for the 4 different levels. I haven't put all 6 levels on, that would be a bit too much. But at the first level, A1 can describe him or herself, what he or she does and where he or she lives. So pretty basic personal information, okay? We jump to L2, can give straightforward descriptions on a variety of familiar subjects, can reasonably fluently relate a straightforward narrative, can give detailed accounts of experiences, describing feelings and reactions. Okay, so quite a bit more advanced at that level. Level 3 can give clear, detailed descriptions on a wide range of subjects related to his or her field of interest. And level 5 can give clear, smoothly flowing, elaborate and often memorable descriptions, integrating sub-themes, developing particular points, and rounding off with an appropriate conclusion. Okay, so you see the progression of expectation as we go up the different levels. And this is an example of what the actual exam paper, the interlocutor card, looks like. This example is from level 3, and it says, section 10, personal information, 1.5 minutes. Remember, that's the actual overall length of the section. And then the interlocutor has to say, this part in italics, now I'd like you to speak on your own for about 1 minute. Okay, so be aware that there is this difference here between the 2 timings. And then I've put on here 1 prompt, because we're going to listen to an example in a minute. The interlocutor has, I think, 4 main prompts usually. Main prompt and a follow-up prompt. And the prompts differ at the different levels, but I don't have time to go into all of that here. So this is level 3. Main prompt 4, what type of music do you enjoy listening to? This is where we as examiners begin timing, okay? So if you also perhaps work as an interlocutor and you do these, or even if you're just practicing in your classroom with your students, you might time the whole thing from much earlier on, from when you start talking. And I think the interlocutor has to time from when after they've given the information at the beginning, all the center number and everything. But we as examiners, we begin timing right here after the first question as the test taker starts to answer. So we start timing here, and that's the timing for the long turn, the sustained monologue, and the whole of the test, actually. We do keep an eye on the timing, the overall timing for the test. It will be 7 minutes overall at level 3. So this section is 1.5 minutes. The next section, which is the discussion, is about 2 minutes. So, you know, we do keep an eye on the times, but there are no real penalties after that. It's only in the sustained monologue that you have to be really careful with the timing. And then we have the follow-up prompts, and this is where I just want to clarify something. So these prompts are here for you to use in case the test taker comes to a natural pause after they've finished their long turn. Then you ask one of these prompts. You don't have to ask them in order. You can choose, there are 4 given, so that you can choose one to fit with what the test taker has said, you know, and you don't have to ask them all. You can ask just 1 or 2, probably 1 or 2 if they have achieved their long turn is going to be sufficient. But what we don't want, which is what we hear every series actually, is, you know, the question, a short answer from the interlocutor, and then straight away from the test taker, sorry, and then straight away all of the other questions being asked one after the other, because that's not giving the test taker the chance to do the monologue properly. Okay, so that is what the test looks like. And now we're going to listen to a level 3. Here's the level 3 criteria again for your reference. We're going to listen to an example of a level 3 student And I'd like you, as we're listening to it, think how you would score it out of 5 for the task, sustained monologue. And so that's the criteria for the sustained monologue task at the top. And then for each qualitative aspect, I know you don't have the mark scheme in front of you, but just for fluency, interaction, range, accuracy, and phonological control. You don't need to put your answers in the chat or anything. I won't be looking at those, but just for your own benefit, think what you would be doing that. And the interlocutor question is the one we just listened to. What type of music do you enjoy listening to? So here we go with the example.
Of music.
Let me just get it to the right place.
I'd like you to speak on your own for about a minute and tell me, what type of music do you enjoy listening to?
Well, I really do enjoy listening to music in my free time. My favourite type of music is classical music, because I love listening to the melodies, and it really relaxes me, and it's a good way to be calmer, because when you live a very frenetic life, you probably need something that can calm you and make you feel happy and relaxed. I also like pop music, because of course there are moments in which I want to have fun, and I want to be cheerful and happy. There are types of music that I don't really like, but in general I think that music is a lovely way to spend time in a cheerful way.
Okay, and can you give me an example of music you don't like?
Well, I'm not really into rap music, because I do think every song has a message, and every artist has its own way to give that message to people that listen to their music. But at the same time, I don't really get how I can understand. I don't really understand rap music and songs. I mean, it's only a personal opinion, but I don't really enjoy listening to this type of music.
Okay, thank you. We're going to...
Okay, so that's the end of that full sustained monologue. And here we have the scores for you. So compare what you gave her with the scores that you have in front of you. This is a very strong candidate for level 3. As you can see, for sustained monologue, she was judged to be at level. She gives a clear, detailed monologue on music, developing some of her points very well. And if we look at the other end, at phonological control, she also achieved a 3 for that, because she has clear natural pronunciation and intonation, which is the exact descriptor for phonological control at level 3. For the other qualitative aspects, she scored 4s, so we felt she was almost at the next level, almost at level 4 descriptors. So just to go through those quickly, for fluency, she expresses herself fluently and almost spontaneously. There are hardly any pauses. For interaction, she responds well to the interlocutor and has no difficulty helping the discussion along. I should also point out, that these 5 qualitative aspects are based on the whole test, not just on the sustained monologue. Okay, so there may be some things that you perhaps didn't pick up from the commentary that I'm giving just through listening to the sustained monologue. But moving on to range, she has a good command of a broad range of vocabulary and structures, including complex sentences. For accuracy, she maintains a high level of grammatical and lexical control with very few errors. And I've already covered phonological control. So yes, the 5 qualitative aspects are based on her performance over the whole test. We only heard a quarter of that for our purposes today. So just bear that in mind. So that's the end of sustained monologue. And now we're moving on to section 12, describe the picture. So the focus of the marking criteria for section 12 is thematic development, and the Common European Framework definition for this is focuses on one aspect of discourse competence and describes the ability of a language user to structure and manage discourse in terms of thematic organization. Okay, so the expectations differ according to the level, but again, the test taker should be able to describe what they see in front of them in some detail and respond to the follow-up question or questions they are asked. Now, the follow-up questions vary depending on the level, from level A1 all the way up to level 5. And I don't have time to go through each of those, obviously, in today's session, but we'll have a look at some in a minute. Also, at levels A1, level 1 and 2, they have 1 picture, and from level 3 upwards, we have 2. Okay, and we expect to hear some organizational markers. So things like in the foreground, in the background, on the left, on the right, behind, in front of, different prepositions to help guide the examiner, the listener, around the picture. So they need to be able to say these, although, at the lower levels, we're only expecting very basic phrases. And here are the descriptors from the different levels from our marking criteria. A1 can describe something using isolated words or simple phrases. Okay, so level 2 can reasonably fluently relate a straightforward narrative or description as a linear sequence of points. So there's the idea of some kind of cohesion coming in there. At level 3, can develop a clear description or narrative, the idea of development coming in, expanding and supporting his or her main points with relevant supporting detail and examples. And at level 5, excuse me, can give extended and clearly structured descriptions and narratives, effectively using a variety of organizational patterns. So again, you can see the progression of the expectation as we go up the levels. So here is, we're going to listen to an example here. This is level 5, and it is a little bit long, but it's a good example. It's well conducted. And as we're listening to it, again, think how you would score it out of 3, remember, for level 5, for the task, for thematic development, and for each qualitative aspect for fluency, interaction, range, accuracy, and phonological control. Remember that a score of 3 is the highest you can give. It's also at level for this one. Okay, so let's just click that and listen for a couple of minutes.
Now, here are 2 pictures showing different lifestyles. The pictures are being considered for a book called Living the Dream. Please tell me what you can see in the pictures.
Okay, I can see 2 pictures depicting 2 different, very different, may I say, kinds of lifestyle. In the upper one, I can see a horse-drawn carriage in a rural area, and it actually looks like a picture from the handbook of, on the Amish community, the people who live off the land and aren't very interested in the contemporary lifestyle. And in the lower picture, there is a majestic skyline of some metropolis. It might look like New York or London, probably, although I don't see a cucumber. The cucumber. It's a big central city. There is a bridge leading from the suburbs to the downtown, and a very modern looking bay.
Okay, which of these pictures would you choose for the book Living the Dream, and why?
Living the Dream. if we take into the account the big city, the so-called big city values of the target audience of this book, the teenagers and higher, up to retirement age probably, the second picture, the lower one, would be more suitable because well, the big city offers this life in a dream, like all the necessary facilities for facilities and opportunities for career growth and educational opportunities and modern healthcare and so on. While in the upper picture, in the rural area, the popular belief is that the inhabitants are backwards a little, and certainly there is a scarcity of up-to-date facilities, educational, recreational and medical. So I think the second picture is more suitable.
Okay, so there's our section 12, thematic development. I just want to, you may be wondering, or you may have picked up what she was talking about there. She thinks the picture of the cityscape she's looking at is, it might be London. She refers to a cucumber. There's a building in London, some of you may know, which is nicknamed the Gherkin, which of course is a type of pickled cucumber. So it's a kind of a vocabulary mistake, unfortunately. I just wanted to clear that up before we go to the scores. So here are the scores that she received. This is level 5, remember. So for the actual task, she was scored 2. She gave an extended description, but it was lacking in development initially. There were minimal organizational features. I think she referred to the upper picture and lower, but that was about it. And no real distinction made between main and secondary points. So she was just at the level. For fluency, and remember the other 5 criteria are for the whole of her test, not just this one section. So fluency overall, she only scored a 1, so she wasn't at level for fluency. Not always spontaneous, sometimes rushed, sometimes hesitant. For interaction, just at level, quite skillful, but not always effortless. And turn taking is not fully natural as yet. Range was again just at level, but a good range, but the use of idioms is not secure. At level 5, we're expecting, expecting them to be able to use colloquialisms and idioms. And she could have also used a wider range of linguistic forms to convey her meaning more precisely. Accuracy wasn't quite at level. She lacks complex language and makes some errors in basic structures. You may have picked up towards the end there, she said, if we take into the account instead of into account, when she was being asked to choose. And her phonological control, she got a 2. She's almost at level. Her speech is clear and easily understood, but there were some mispronunciations. She said scarcity and modern, for example, and so she didn't quite make the 3. Okay, so I hope that was a useful thing. And then just to move on to an extra little slide here, which is some things to bear in mind, especially for level 3 and above, where you have 3 pictures. The question will be something like this. Here are 2 pictures showing different, I think it was lifestyles, and the one we just listened to. It could be different ways of learning or different holiday types or something like that. Please tell me what you can see in the pictures. And that last part, please tell me what you can see in the pictures, is pretty standard through several of the levels. But please tell your students to avoid beginning each sentence with I can see, I can see, I can see. At level 3, we want a more varied range of sentence starters. And quite often we get, because they are answering the question, they're being asked, what can you see? I can see this, I can see that, I can see the other. But, as language teachers, this is they need to be able to use a wider variety of sentence starters, and that will help them, score a higher mark. They also need to compare and contrast what is shown. That depends, of course, on the question, on the follow-up question they're asked. And that they need to develop the theme that's presented, but stick to what's in the picture. You know, don't go off on a tangent with some story that it reminds them of something. To stick to what's in front of them, develop the theme presented. There's enough material in the pictures that are given. And to remember to use a variety of organizational markers. You know, in the top or bottom picture, I think we had in this one, in contrast, however, in the other picture, whereas, all of these things are appropriate. And I'm sure you have lists of these around your classrooms already for your students to learn. So that's the end of the tasks, and I know I'm running late again, but I'm going to quickly go through 2 of the qualitative aspects for you. There are 5, and we mark these at the same time as we're marking the other tasks. Today, I'm going to look at fluency and phonological control, but I'm going to start, probably, it seems backwards, with the last one, phonological control. Probably because that's usually the one that I first make my first impression mark as I'm listening to the sustained monologue. I get a sense of the candidate's speech and where they are, and of course I can revise that as we go through, but I very often make a first mark as I'm listening to sustained monologue. So what do we mean by phonological control? Well, there are quite a lot of, sorry, I've got my wrong sheet here. Phonological control covers a whole range of things to do with language production, right from the phonetic features of each language, word stress, along to rhythm and intonation. But if you think of it as pronunciation and intonation, that's a good couple of things to remember. You know, really, can they be understood? And so the descriptors for the different levels are as follows. At level A1, can be understood with some effort by native speakers used to dealing with speakers of their language group. You know, so we are very forgiving as we listen to the lower level. Level 2, pronunciation is clearly intelligible, even if a foreign accent is sometimes evident and occasional mispronunciations occur. Level 3 has acquired a clear, natural pronunciation and intonation. And if you remember the example we listened to for sustained monologue, that test taker had a clear, natural pronunciation and intonation. And at level 3, we're not expecting native speaker level, but the accent should be less obvious at level 3. And at level 5, speech is immediately and certainly understood. The speaker uses assimilations and deletions comparable to the continuous speech of a native speaker. And just as another piece of information, most candidates, or let's say many candidates for level 5, will have spent an extended period of time, you know, of a few months or maybe a whole year in an English-speaking country. So they will be pretty fluent and have good phonological control. So that's the progression of the expectations for phonological control. And moving on now to fluency, the Common European Framework definition is fluency is the ability to articulate, to keep going, and to cope when one lands in a dead end. I'm sure we can all relate to that personally. We'll all have our own stories about that. At level A1, they can manage very short, isolated utterances with much pausing to search for expressions. We're not expecting full sentences here. Well, we don't even speak in full sentences a lot of the time, do we? Up to level 2, can keep going comprehensively, even though pausing for grammatical and lexical planning is very evident. But we don't want too many pauses. Level 3 can produce stretches of language with a fairly even tempo and few noticeably long pauses. Okay, and then level 5 can express him or herself spontaneously at length with a natural colloquial flow. So again, you know, level 5, they can keep going like a native speaker, really. Lack of fluency is characterized by unnatural pausing behavior and slowness in oral production. So that's fluency, and that concludes the body of the presentation for today. I'll just give you a quick summary of what we have covered. We've looked at the 4 tasks, even though we've only looked at 2 of them in detail. 4 tasks and 5 qualitative aspects give you 9 scores, or 8 at the 2 lower levels. The mark scale of 1 to 5, where 3 is at level, and of course at level 5 it's only a mark scale of 1 to 3. And then for section 10, sustained monologue, there is a long turn. Maintain the conversation for the full 1.5 or 2 minutes, depending on the level, and time carefully, I think I should put on there also. Section 12, thematic development, describe the picture or pictures, structure the description, and develop the theme. And coming in part 2 are the other 2 sections, conversing with another person. So section 11 and section 13, discussion, where the focus of the marking criteria is on turn taking, and of course this doesn't happen at the 2 lower levels, and role play, which where the focus of the marking criteria is sociolinguistic appropriateness, and I'll go into those in detail tomorrow. We also have qualitative aspects, and I'll be looking at interaction, range, and accuracy in the next section. Here are a couple of links which we will try to put in the chat as well, or you can access them later when you look at the recording, to resources on the Pearson website for classroom activities and general resources. And because I know we've gone up more than 5 minutes over time, I do apologize, but I hope it's been useful. I will say part 2 will probably be a little bit shorter. And are there any questions? Gael, are you there?
Yes.
Hi.
Yes. Hi, I'm here. Yes. There are some questions.
Let's see if we can answer some.
Yeah, let's go through them. The first one is in section 10. When should we use the follow-up questions, or is it better if we don't use them?
It depends is the correct answer. You use them once the test taker has achieved that long turn. So you must know what that long turn is. If it was level 3, the example I had in blue, it's 50 to 60 seconds. So you basically ask the first question, you let them speak for at least the length of the what the long turn is. And they can keep going. At the higher levels, they may manage to get to finish, the whole of the time just speaking by themselves, which is great. You don't have to ask any questions then. But if they do sort of pause or they dry up, then you can ask the follow-up question to keep them going till the end of the 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes at the 2 higher levels. Okay, you're not obliged to use the questions. They're there to help in case you need to. You probably will need to use them at the lower levels because they're not as competent linguistically at that stage. But no, I hope that clears that up because it is an important point.
There is a couple more related with section 10.
Sure.
It says, what if in section 10, test taker finishes 10 seconds before the time is over? Shall we ask a follow-up question?
Yes, definitely. Yes. So if they finish, and as I said, we examiners have a 5-second tolerance there. So if they stop talking, they kind of come to a natural pause at say 1 minute 20. Ask another question, even though they're not going to be able to, make much of an answer. It will take them past that 1:25, 1:30 point, and that means they've achieved that sustained monologue time.
Okay,
does that make sense? Yes.
Yes, it does. There is one related with the first listening or audio. She said that the candidate uses a lot of and if that counts against her by any chance.
The candidate used a lot of
Just like 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 this
Yeah, that candidate, she was a strong candidate, and she was going quite quickly as well, wasn't she? So that wouldn't count against her. No, we're listening. We're trying to mark positively, to give her the best mark we can. And because she had a lot of content and she was very competent in her use of language with a very good range of vocabulary and structures, that was how she got the 3 for the sustained monologue. But no, wouldn't count against her necessarily. No.
Okay, one related with accents. Do you take into account accents, either British or American English or any accent?
Well, the main priority for accent is, it is mentioned in the criteria. We the main thing is it clear? Are we able to hear what is being said? But yes, it isn't a British test, isn't it? So we are hoping for something towards a British accent, which actually the one that we listened to, she had some vowel sounds that were very British.
Okay, yeah, probably we are ahead of time, so probably we could just answer another one. Reference in section 12. Can the candidates alternate from picture to picture when describing, or does it have to be first picture, second picture?
No, it doesn't matter which way they do it. Very often we hear a candidate describes one in a great detail, and the interlocutor will gently move them on to the second picture if they've forgotten to look at it. But if they go back and forth, that's fine as well. It doesn't really matter how they do it. If they go back and forth, you could argue that they could get in more of the organizational features, which would be good to hear. So there's no preference there. It's as long as they answer the question and do a good job on the comparison. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Aline, for this.
You're welcome. For
this very useful session. Anything you wanted to say for a closure, please?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone very much for their for being here and for taking part. And I will have a look at all of your all of the questions and so on later, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to you through some other means. Obviously not on here. So please rest assured that we will try to address your questions. And thank you for being here. It's been fun talking to people from all around the world.
Thank you, Aline, and thanks everyone that joined from all over the world. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you in the following sessions we'll be having tomorrow and the next week. And yeah, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll stop the recording now.